Clementine's pies were legendary. Flaky crusts, bursting with sweet fillings. They were the only reason some folks even bothered to come into Dust Gulch. Her apple pie could make a grown man cry. Her peach cobbler was sunshine in a dish, and her berry tarts were little jewels of deliciousness. Clementine poured her heart and soul into every single pastry, hoping to bring a little joy to the dusty, sun-baked town. But Dust Gulch wasn't known for its appreciation of fine baking. It was known for its sharp tongues and even sharper judgments. And Clementine, bless her generous heart and equally generous figure, was a favorite target. Look at Clementine, waddling around like a pregnant sow. Jebediah would bellow from his usual spot on the porch of the saloon, a chorus of snickers erupting from his cronies. No wonder she's so fat. She eats all her profits. Clementine tried to ignore them. She'd heard all before. Butterball, hippo, Clementine the Colossal. The words stung, of course, but she tried to focus on the happy faces of the children who would sneak into the bakery for a stolen cookie, their eyes wide with delight. Those moments made it almost bearable. She ran Clementine's Sweet Surrender, a small bakery with a faded blue door and a perpetually ringing bell. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and sugar, a stark contrast to the dust and despair that permeated the rest of Dust Gulch. Her apron, always dusted with flour, hid her figure as best it could, but it was no match for the prying eyes and cruel remarks of the townsfolk. They saw only her size, never the warmth in her smile or the kindness in her eyes. They saw only a target, ripe for ridicule, and they rarely missed an opportunity to take a shot. Dust Gulch was a place where the sun beat down mercilessly, cracking the earth and baking the hopes out of anyone foolish enough to linger. The buildings were ramshackle, thrown together with whatever wood could be scavenged, and coated in a thick layer of dust that never seemed to wash away. Even the tumbleweeds seemed to hurry through town, eager to escape its oppressive atmosphere. Life in Dust Gulch was hard. The gold mine had dried up years ago, leaving most folks scraping by on meager earnings from ranching or odd jobs. But hardship didn't breed camaraderie, it bred resentment. People looked for someone to blame, someone to feel superior to, and appearances were the easiest target. The women, especially, were judged harshly. They scrutinized each other's dresses, hairstyles, and figures, always searching for flaws. A wrinkle, a stain, a pound too many, all were grounds for gossip and scorn. The men weren't much better, valuing strength and bravado above all else. Any sign of weakness, whether physical or emotional, was met with derision. Jebediah, the ringleader of Clementine's tormentors, embodied the worst of Dust Gulch. He was a failed prospector with a mean streak a mile wide and a deep-seated need to feel important. He saw Clementine as an easy target, a way to boost his own fragile ego by tearing her down. His cronies, a collection of equally bitter and disillusioned men, followed his lead, eager to share in the fleeting sense of power that came from mocking someone else. In Dust Gulch, beauty was a weapon, and conformity was a shield. Clementine, with her kind heart and ample figure, possessed neither. She was an easy target in a town that thrived on cruelty. Sheriff Brody was a man carved from the very landscape of Dust Gulch, weathered, unyielding, and silent. He was tall and lean, with eyes as sharp and blue as the desert sky after a storm. He wore his badge with a quiet authority, and his presence alone was enough to quell most disturbances. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. He'd seen it all in Dust Gulch. The desperation, the greed, the petty squabbles that often escalated into something uglier. He learned to turn a blind eye to some things, to pick his battles carefully. But the constant, relentless mockery directed at Clementine was starting to grate on him. He'd often see her through the window of the saloon, her face flushed with embarrassment as Jebediah and his cronies hurled insults her way. He'd observe the way she'd try to brush it off, forcing a smile for the sake of her customers, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. Brody wasn't a man prone to displays of emotion, but he felt a flicker of something akin to anger rise within him whenever he witnessed the town's cruelty towards her. It wasn't just that it was unfair, it was cowardly. Picking on someone who was defenseless, who only wanted to bring a little sweetness into a bitter world. He knew he should intervene. As sheriff, it was his duty to maintain order, and that included protecting the vulnerable. But he hesitated. He wasn't sure how to stop it without making things worse, without drawing even more attention to Clementine. And besides, he wasn't sure why he cared so much. He just knew that the sight of her quiet suffering bothered him more than he cared to admit. So he watched, and he waited, his disapproval growing with each passing day. The annual Dust Gulch pie eating contest was usually a festive affair, a brief respite from the town's usual grimness. Clementine always donated a mountain of pies, hoping to spread some cheer. This year, however, Jebediah saw it as an opportunity for a new level of cruelty. He gathered his cronies and hatched a plan. As Clementine carried a tray laden with her famous apple pies towards the judging table, Jebediah stepped directly into her path, feigning surprise. "Whoa there, Clementine! Didn't see you coming," he boomed, his voice dripping with false joviality. The accident sent pies tumbling to the ground, splattering filling across Clementine's apron and dress. The crowd gasped. Then a nervous titter rippled through the onlookers. Jebediah, seizing the moment, pointed a finger at Clementine, now covered in sticky apple goo. "Looks like Clementine's already had her fill. No need for her to enter the contest." Folks. His cronies roared with laughter, and soon the whole town was joining in, their cruel laughter echoing through the square. Clementine stood frozen, her face burning with shame. The pies, her labor of love, lay ruined at her feet, mirroring the destruction of her spirit. But Jebediah wasn't finished. He produced a large, crudely drawn picture of a pig from behind his back, holding it up for all to see. "I think we found Clementine's portrait," he yelled, sending another wave of laughter through the crowd. Clementine's eyes welled up with tears. This wasn't just teasing. This was a deliberate act of humiliation designed to break her spirit. She turned and fled, her heart shattered into a million pieces. The laughter followed her all the way back to her bakery, a constant reminder of her shame. She slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the empty space. This time, the joy had been completely wrung out of her. All that remained was a crushing, unbearable heartbreak. The laughter was still ringing in the air when Sheriff Brody arrived. He had been at the edge of town, investigating a reported cattle rustling, but the sound of the commotion had drawn him back. He saw Clementine fleeing, her face streaked with tears, and the sight filled him with a cold fury. He strode into the square, his boots thudding against the dusty ground. The laughter died down as the townsfolk recognized his grim expression. Jebediah, emboldened by his earlier success, puffed out his chest and smirked. "Well, Sheriff," he said, "just having a little fun with Clementine. No harm done." Brody fixed him with a stare that could freeze the desert. "That's where you're wrong, Jebediah," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "There's plenty of harm done when you deliberately set out to hurt someone." He then turned to address the entire town, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "I've seen a lot of things in Dust Gulch, and I've tolerated a lot. But this is beyond the pale. Clementine is a good woman, and she deserves your respect, not your ridicule." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Anyone who has a problem with that could take it up with me." Silence descended upon the square, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Jebediah, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon, avoided Brody's gaze. No one dared to challenge the sheriff. Brody then walked towards Clementine's bakery. He gently pushed open the door and stepped inside. Clementine was huddled behind the counter, sobbing softly. "Clementine," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "are you all right?" She looked up, startled. "Sheriff, I just want to disappear," she choked out. "Don't you let them do that to you," Brody said firmly. "You're worth more than all of them put together. You bring joy to this town with your baking, and they repay you with cruelty. That says more about them than it does about you." He paused, then added, You're a good woman, Clementine. Don't ever forget that." And with that, he turned and left, leaving Clementine speechless and profoundly touched by his unexpected act of kindness. Clementine stood in the quiet of her bakery, Brody's words echoing in her mind. She replayed the scene in her head, the stern sheriff standing up to the entire town, defending her. It was something she never could have imagined. She looked at her reflection in the dusty window, her face still blotchy from crying. Could she really be the good woman Sheriff Brody spoke of? It was hard to believe after years of being told she was nothing but a figure of ridicule. But something had shifted. The sheriff's words, his unexpected kindness, had planted a seed of hope within her. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of respect and even affection. She began to clean up the mess from the pie-eating contest, scrubbing the apple filling from the floor and wiping down the counters. As she worked, she found herself smiling slightly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. The next day, Sheriff Brody came into the bakery. Clementine's heart fluttered unexpectedly. He ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie, the very pie that had been used against her the day before. He ate it slowly, deliberately, his eyes meeting hers across the counter. "Best pie in Dust Gulch," he said, his voice low and sincere. Clementine blushed, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Sheriff," she mumbled, avoiding his gaze. He lingered in the bakery longer than necessary, making small talk about the weather and the cattle rustling investigation. Clementine found herself drawn to his quiet strength and his surprisingly gentle eyes. He wasn't like the other men in Dust Gulch, with their loud boasts and their shallow judgments. He seemed to see something more in her, something beyond her size and her perceived flaws. As he finally turned to leave, he tipped his hat and said, "See you around, Clementine." She watched him go, a strange mix of surprise and hope swirling within her. It was just a simple goodbye, but it felt like so much more. It felt like a promise of something new, something unexpected, something special. Maybe, just maybe, a connection was forming between them. A connection that could change everything. Jebediah's humiliation at the pie-eating contest and the sheriff's subsequent dressing down festered within him like a poisonous weed. He couldn't stand the thought of being publicly shamed, especially by someone like Brody, who always seemed to look down on him. And the idea that Clementine, of all people, had been the cause of it all, it was simply unbearable. So, he did what he always did. He resorted to lies and gossip. He gathered his cronies at the saloon and began to spin a web of deceit, carefully crafted to poison the town's opinion of Clementine and the sheriff. "Did you see the way Brody looked at her?" he'd sneer, taking a swig of his whiskey. "Like she was something special. I bet she's been sweetening his coffee with more than just sugar, if you catch my drift." His cronies would chuckle knowingly, and the rumors would spread like wildfire through Dust Gulch. He hinted that Clementine was using her feminine wiles to manipulate the sheriff, that she was probably after his money and his position. He suggested that Brody was neglecting his duties, too busy visiting the bakery to properly enforce the law. He even started spreading rumors about Clementine's baking, claiming she was using cheap ingredients and overcharging for her pies. He knew that her bakery was her livelihood, and he wanted to destroy it, to punish her for daring to attract the sheriff's attention. The town, ever susceptible to gossip, began to turn on Clementine once again. They whispered behind her back, avoided her gaze, and stopped frequenting her bakery. The few customers who did come in were noticeably colder, their smiles strained. Jebediah's plan was working. He was slowly but surely poisoning the town's opinion of Clementine and Sheriff Brody, turning them into outcasts. He wanted to make them pay for the humiliation he had suffered, and he wouldn't rest until he had succeeded. The air in Dust Gulch, already thick with dust and resentment, grew even more toxic, fueled by Jebediah's lies and the town's willingness to believe the worst. Sheriff Brody had always been a man of action, not words, but even he was beginning to feel the weight of the town's negativity. He saw the way Clementine's business was dwindling, the way she tried to hide her hurt behind a forced smile. He heard the whispers, the sly glances, the thinly veiled insults. And it made his blood boil. He was tired of the petty squabbles, the constant judgment, the relentless cruelty that seemed to be the lifeblood of Dust Gulch. He was tired of the way they treated Clementine, a woman who only wanted to bring a little sweetness into their miserable lives. He also realized something else. He cared about Clementine more than he wanted to admit, even to himself. He admired her resilience, her unwavering kindness, her ability to find joy in the face of adversity. He respected her strength, her gentle spirit, and the way she poured her heart into her baking. He knew he couldn't stand by and watch as Jebediah and the rest of the town destroyed her. He had to do something bold, something that would silence the gossip and protect Clementine once and for all. He sat in his office late one night, the only light coming from a flickering oil lamp. He thought about Clementine, about the town, about the kind of future he wanted for Dust Gulch. And he made a decision that would shock the town, challenge their prejudices, and perhaps even change their hearts. He would marry Clementine. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. He knew it would be controversial, that would raise eyebrows and stir up even more gossip. But he also knew it was the right thing to do. It was the only way to truly protect Clementine, to show the town that he valued her, that she deserved their respect. And maybe, just maybe, it was also a way to admit to himself the feelings that he had been trying so hard to ignore. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but Sheriff Brody had never shied away from a challenge. He was ready to face the town's negativity head-on, armed with his badge, his conviction, and a newfound determination to defend the woman he had come to admire. He was ready to make a bold decision, a decision that would change everything. The next day was Market Day in Dust Gulch. The town square was bustling with activity, vendors hawking their wares, children running through the crowds, and gossips whispering in corners. Clementine, despite the lingering sting of the rumors, had opened her bakery, hoping to salvage what she could of her business. Sheriff Brody, his jaw set with determination, walked into the square. He climbed onto the makeshift stage that was usually reserved for traveling performers and raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice booming across the square. All eyes turned to him, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension on their faces. "I've been watching this town for a long time," he continued, "and I've seen a lot of things I haven't liked. I've seen people judge for things that don't matter. I've seen kindness repaid with cruelty, and I've seen good people driven to despair." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "And I've decided that it's time for a change." He stepped down from a stage and walked towards Clementine's bakery. He stopped in front of her, his eyes meeting hers. He took a deep breath, then spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Clementine," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I admire your strength, your kindness, and your unwavering spirit. You're a good woman, and you deserve to be treated with respect. And that's why I'm asking you this, in front of the entire town." He knelt down on one knee, pulled a small, tarnished ring from his pocket, and held it out to her. "Clementine, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The square fell silent. The gossips stopped whispering, the children stopped running, and the vendors stopped hawking their wares. Everyone was stunned, their mouths agape, their eyes wide with disbelief. Jebediah, standing at the back of the crowd, looked like he had been struck by lightning. Clementine, her face flushed with surprise and emotion, could only stare at the sheriff, tears welling up in her eyes. She never expected this, never dared to dream that someone like him could ever care for someone like her. The entire town held its breath, waiting for her answer. Tears streamed down Clementine's face, blurring her vision. She looked at Sheriff Brody, kneeling before her, his eyes filled with a sincerity she had never seen before. It was all so sudden, so unexpected. Could this really be happening? Could someone like him truly want to marry someone like her? Doubt gnawed her. She was just a baker, a woman constantly ridiculed for her size. He was the sheriff, a respected figure, a man who could have any woman he wanted. What could he possibly see in her? But then she remembered his words of kindness, his unwavering support, the way he had stood up for her against the entire town. She remembered the warmth in his eyes when he had looked at her, the genuine smile that had touched her heart. She looked around at the stunned faces of the townsfolk, at their gaping mouths and wide eyes. She knew that many of them would disapprove, that they would whisper and gossip and judge. But she also knew that Sheriff Brody was offering her something she had always longed for: acceptance, respect, and love. Taking a deep breath, she reached out and took his hand. "Yes, Brody," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by a murmur of disbelief. Jebediah, his face contorted with rage, stormed off into the saloon, slamming the door behind him. Sheriff Brody smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that transformed his face. He stood up, slipped the ring onto Clementine's finger, and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Thank you, Clementine," he whispered in her ear. "You won't regret this." Clementine clung to him, feeling a sense of security and belonging she had never known before. She still had doubts, still had fears, but she also had hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this unlikely union could bring her the happiness she had always dreamed of. She had accepted his offer, hesitantly, cautiously, but with a growing sense of anticipation. She was about to embark on a new chapter in her life, a chapter filled with uncertainty, but also with the promise of love and acceptance. The announcement of the wedding sent a ripple of activity through Dust Gulch, a mix of excitement, resentment, and reluctant cooperation. Some of the townsfolk, swayed by the sheriff's strong stance, felt a pang of guilt for their past behavior and offered to help with the preparations. Others, still under Jebediah's influence, grumbled and complained, doing the bare minimum to avoid Brody's disapproval. Martha, the town's seamstress, offered to make Clementine's wedding dress. It was a simple but elegant gown of pale blue cotton, the best material Martha had, with delicate lace trim around the neckline and sleeves. As she took Clementine's measurements, Martha apologized for her past unkindness. "I was wrong to judge you, Clementine," she said, her voice soft with regret. "You're a good woman, and you deserve to be happy." Other women offered to help with the decorations, stringing up colorful ribbons and wildflowers in the town square. Even the children got involved, collecting smooth stones to line the aisle. But not everyone was so enthusiastic. Jebediah and his cronies spent their days at the saloon, muttering about the sham wedding and plotting ways to disrupt the ceremony. They spread rumors that the wedding was just a ploy by Brody to gain more power, that he didn't really care for Clementine, and that he would soon abandon her. The baker from the next town over, a gruff but kindly old man named Silas, offered to bake the wedding cake. It was a magnificent creation, a towering three-tiered cake adorned with sugar flowers and delicate frosting. He delivered it personally, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Don't let those grumblers get you down, Clementine," he said, patting her hand. "You and the sheriff deserve all the happiness in the world." As the wedding day approached, the town square slowly transformed into a festive gathering place, a testament to the power of love and forgiveness. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered, and the threat of disruption loomed large. The wedding preparations were a microcosm of Dust Gulch itself, a town divided, torn between prejudice and acceptance, between bitterness and hope. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a fresh start. Clementine, dressed in her simple blue gown, felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement as she walked towards the town square, her arm linked with Silas, the baker who had become a dear friend. But as she approached the makeshift altar, chaos erupted. Jebediah, fueled by whiskey and resentment, burst into the square, brandishing a bucket of mud. "This wedding is a farce," he bellowed, his voice slurred. "Brody's just marrying her to spite us all." He raised the bucket, ready to drench Clementine in mud. But before he could act, Sheriff Brody intervened. With lightning speed, he stepped in front of Clementine, knocking the bucket out of Jebediah's hands. The mud splattered across the ground, narrowly missing Clementine's dress. "That's enough, Jebediah," Brody roared, his eyes blazing with anger. "I've tolerated your nonsense for too long. This has gone far enough." He grabbed Jebediah by the collar and dragged him away from the crowd, his deputies quickly stepping in to restrain him. The townsfolk gasped, their initial shock giving way to a mixture of fear and awe. "Take him to the jail," Brody ordered, his voice cold and hard. "And make sure he stays there until he learns to behave himself." The deputies hauled Jebediah away, his shouts and curses fading into the distance. Brody turned back to Clementine, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Clementine nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you, Brody," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved me." "I'll always protect you, Clementine," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Always." He turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "I won't tolerate anyone disrupting this wedding or disrespecting Clementine. This is my town, and I make the rules." He paused, then added, "Now, let's get on with the ceremony." The crowd, subdued and respectful, fell silent as the wedding resumed, the threat of disruption finally extinguished. With Jebediah safely locked away, a sense of calm descended upon the town square. The preacher, a kindly old man with a gentle smile, stepped forward and began the ceremony. Clementine and Sheriff Brody stood before him, their hands clasped tightly together. Clementine's heart fluttered with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She looked at Brody, his eyes filled with a quiet strength and a surprising tenderness, and knew that she was making the right decision. The preacher spoke of love, commitment, and the importance of standing by each other through thick and thin. He spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and the power of a community to heal and grow. His words resonated with the townsfolk, many of whom were beginning to reevaluate their past behavior. When it came time for the vows, Clementine's voice trembled as she spoke. "Brody, I promise to love you, to cherish you, and to respect you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your confidant. I promise to stand by you through good times and bad, in sickness and in health." Brody, his voice surprisingly steady, returned her vows. "Clementine, I promise to protect you, to honor you, and to love you unconditionally. I promise to be your protector, your provider, and your unwavering support. I promise to stand by you always, no matter what challenges we may face." As they exchanged vows, a sense of hope filled the air. The townsfolk, who had once doubted and scorned Clementine, now looked on with a newfound respect and admiration. They saw in her a strength and a kindness that they had previously overlooked, and they saw in Brody a man who was willing to defy their expectations and stand up for what he believed in. With the vows exchanged and the rings blessed, the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. Sheriff Brody gently lifted Clementine's veil and kissed her, a kiss that sealed their commitment and defied the town's expectations. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the square, a symbol of their tentative acceptance and a celebration of a love that had blossomed against all odds. They were married, bound together by love and a shared desire to create a better future for themselves and for Dust Gulch. The wedding celebrations faded, and Clementine found herself moving into the sheriff's small, sparsely furnished house next to the jail. It was a far cry from her cozy bakery, and the silence was almost deafening after the constant bustle of her shop. The first few weeks of their marriage were awkward. Brody was a man of habit, used to his solitary life. Clementine was used to nurturing and caring for others, but she was hesitant to intrude on his routine. They tiptoed around each other, unsure of their roles and responsibilities. Clementine tried to make the house more homey, adding touches of warmth and color. She hung curtains, placed wildflowers in vases, and filled the air with the aroma of freshly baked bread. Brody, in turn, tried to be more communicative, asking about her day and sharing details about his work. But conversations often felt stilted and silences lingered. They had different habits and different expectations. Brody was an early riser, accustomed to a simple breakfast of black coffee and hardtack. Clementine preferred to sleep in a bit and then indulge in a more elaborate breakfast of pastries and fruit. He was quiet and reserved, while she was chatty and expressive. One evening, Clementine tried to cook Brody's favorite meal, a hearty stew with beef and vegetables. But she accidentally added too much salt, rendering it almost inedible. Brody, ever polite, tried to eat it without complaint, but Clementine could see the grimace on his face. "I'm so sorry, Brody," she said, feeling embarrassed. "I ruined it." Brody smiled gently. "It's all right, Clementine," he said. "We'll figure it out. We have plenty of time to learn each other's tastes." That night, they stayed up late talking, sharing stories about their past, their hopes for the future, and their fears about their new life together. They learned about each other's dreams, their quirks, and their vulnerabilities. And slowly, gradually, they began to understand and appreciate each other on a deeper level. The initial awkwardness began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of connection and intimacy. Their marriage, born out of defiance and a desire to protect, was slowly transforming into something more meaningful, something real. As time went on, Clementine's influence began to subtly transform Sheriff Brody. Her kindness, like a warm sun, gradually melted his tough exterior, revealing a more gentle side that few had ever seen. She started packing him a lunch every day, a welcome change from his usual hardtack and jerky. She included little treats, a slice of apple pie, a few of her famous sugar cookies, or a small piece of chocolate. He'd find these little surprises in his lunch pail, and a small smile would play on his lips. He started bringing her flowers he picked on his patrols, wildflowers he knew she loved. He'd leave them on the kitchen table, a silent gesture of affection. He even started helping her in the bakery, kneading dough or frosting cakes when he had a free moment. He was surprisingly good at it, his strong hands surprisingly gentle. He never admitted it, but he enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of creating something delicious. Clementine noticed the changes in him, and her heart swelled with warmth. She saw him interact with the town children, his gruff voice softening as he offered them a piece of candy or a playful pat on the head. She saw him help elderly Mrs. Gable carry her groceries, his strong arms bearing the weight with ease. He even started smiling more, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look years younger. It was a rare sight, but when it happened, it lit up his entire face. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Brody surprised Clementine by taking her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you, Clementine," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You've brought a lot of light into my life." Clementine smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "You've brought a lot of light into mine too, Brody," she said softly. She knew that their marriage had started out of a sense of duty and protection, but it was slowly evolving into something much deeper, something more meaningful. Clementine's kindness and baking skills were not just softening the sheriff's tough exterior. They were building a foundation of love and respect that would last a lifetime. They were becoming a team, partners in life, bound together by a bond that was stronger than any prejudice or expectation. As Sheriff Brody transformed, so too did the town's perception of Clementine. They began to see her not as a figure of ridicule, but as a kind, generous woman who had brought out the best in their sheriff. They noticed that Brody was more patient, more understanding, and more willing to listen to their concerns. He was still a strong and authoritative figure, but he was also more compassionate and approachable. They credited Clementine with this change, recognizing her positive influence on him. They started frequenting her bakery again, drawn in by the delicious aromas and the warm atmosphere. They apologized for their past behavior, their voices filled with genuine remorse. "We were wrong to treat you so badly, Clementine," Mrs. Gable said one day, her eyes filled with tears. "You're a good woman, and you deserve our respect." Clementine forgave them readily, her heart filled with compassion. She knew that they had been influenced by Jebediah's lies and by their own prejudices. But she also believed in the power of forgiveness and the possibility of change. She started donating her baked goods to town events, bringing joy and sweetness to gatherings that had once been filled with bitterness and resentment. She organized baking classes for the children, teaching them the secrets of her delicious recipes and instilling in them a sense of creativity and pride. She even visited Jebediah in jail, offering him a slice of her apple pie and a word of forgiveness. He refused to accept it, his heart still hardened by anger and resentment. But Clementine didn't give up on him. She knew that even the most hardened hearts could be softened with time and kindness. Slowly but surely, Dust Gulch began to transform. The town became more accepting, more compassionate, and more united. They learned to value kindness, generosity, and inner beauty over superficial appearances. They learned to appreciate Clementine for who she was, a loving wife, a talented baker, and a beacon of hope in a harsh and unforgiving world. The town's transformation was a testament to the power of love and forgiveness, and a celebration of the unlikely union of a kind-hearted baker and a strong, silent sheriff. They had defied the town's expectations, challenged their prejudices, and ultimately changed their hearts. Even though the town had changed, Jebediah remained stubbornly bitter. He seethed in his jail cell, plotting his revenge. He couldn't stand the sight of Clementine and Brody's happiness, their influence over the town, and the way everyone had turned against him. One dark night, he managed to escape from jail with the help of a disgruntled former deputy, a man who still harbored resentment towards Brody. He slipped into the shadows, his mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. He knew he couldn't confront Brody directly. He was no match for the sheriff's strength and skill. But he could hurt him where it would hurt the most, by harming Clementine. He waited until Clementine was alone in the bakery, preparing for the next day's orders. He crept inside, his face hidden by a dark bandana, a glint of malice in his eyes. He grabbed Clementine from behind, covering her mouth with his hand to stifle her screams. "This is for ruining my life, Clementine," he hissed in her ear. "You and that meddling sheriff are going to pay." He dragged her out of the bakery and towards the abandoned mine shaft on the outskirts of town. He planned to leave her there, stranded and helpless, hoping that the harsh desert conditions would claim her life. As he dragged her along, Clementine struggled against him, her heart pounding with fear. She knew that her life was in danger, that Jebediah was capable of anything. She prayed that Brody would come to her rescue, but she didn't know if he would find her in time. Jebediah's desperate act of revenge put Clementine in grave danger, threatening to shatter the peace that had finally settled over Dust Gulch. He was determined to make them pay, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The fate of Clementine and the future of Dust Gulch hung in the balance. Back in town, Brody returned to an empty house and an open bakery door, a sense of dread washing over him. He saw the signs of struggle, a dropped rolling pin, flowers scattered across the floor. He knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. He raced out of the bakery and rallied the townsfolk, his voice filled with urgency. "Jebediah's escaped," he announced. "He's taken Clementine." A wave of fear and anger swept through the crowd. They knew that Jebediah was capable of anything, and they feared for Clementine's safety. "We'll find her, Sheriff." Silas, the baker, said, his voice firm. "We'll bring her back safe." The townsfolk formed a search party, fanning out across the desert, their hearts pounding with fear and determination. Brody led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon, his mind racing with worry. He followed Jebediah's tracks towards the abandoned mine shaft, his pace quickening with each step. He knew that time was running out, that Clementine's life was in danger. He reached the mine shaft and saw Jebediah standing at the entrance, his face contorted with rage. Clementine was tied up nearby, her eyes filled with terror. "Let her go, Jebediah," Brody shouted, his voice echoing through the desert. "Not a chance, Sheriff," Jebediah sneered. "She's going to pay for ruining my life." He lunged at Clementine, brandishing a knife, but Brody was too quick for him. With lightning speed, he drew his gun and fired a shot, disarming Jebediah and sending him sprawling to the ground. Brody rushed to Clementine's side, untying her and pulling her into a tight embrace. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Clementine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm all right now," she said, clinging to him tightly. "You saved me." Brody turned to Jebediah, his eyes blazing with anger. He arrested him once again, his deputies taking him back to jail, this time under tighter security. He then turned to the townsfolk, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you," he said. "You helped me save Clementine. You prove that this town has changed, that you care about each other." He looked at Clementine, his eyes filled with love. "And I prove that I'll always protect you. Clementine," he said softly. "Always." His brave rescue of Clementine solidified his position as the town's protector and proved the depth of his love for her, silencing any lingering doubts and uniting the community in their appreciation for their sheriff and his wife. In the days that followed Jebediah's final act of malice, the town of Dust Gulch underwent a profound transformation. The townsfolk realized how close they had come to losing Clementine, and they finally understood the true value of her presence in their lives. They flocked to her bakery, showering her with gifts, flowers, and heartfelt apologies. They confessed their past prejudices, their cruel remarks, and their blind acceptance of Jebediah's lies. "We were so wrong, Clementine." Martha, the seamstress, said, her voice choked with emotion. "We judged you for your appearance, but we never saw your inner beauty. You're the kindest, most generous person we know." Other townsfolk echoed her sentiments, expressing their deep regret for their past behavior and their newfound appreciation for Clementine's unwavering kindness. They realized that her weight was irrelevant, that it was her heart that truly mattered. They started organizing community events to honor Clementine, celebrating her contributions to the town and showcasing her delicious baking. They held a Clementine Appreciation Day, where they showered her with gifts and accolades and declared her an honorary citizen of Dust Gulch. They even petitioned Sheriff Brody to rename the town Clementine's Gulch, a testament to her transformative influence and her enduring legacy. Clementine, overwhelmed by their outpouring of love and support, forgave them completely. She knew that they had learned their lesson, that they had finally seen her for who she truly was. She continued to bake her delicious pies and cakes, filling the town with sweetness and joy. She continued to spread her kindness and compassion, touching the lives of everyone she met. And she continued to love and support Sheriff Brody, her strong and silent husband, who had always believed in her, even when no one else did. Dust Gulch had finally accepted Clementine, not for her appearance, but for her inner beauty and worth. They had learned that true beauty lies within, that kindness and compassion are more valuable than any physical attribute. They had learned to love and appreciate Clementine for who she was, a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of forgiveness. Years passed in Dust Gulch, now affectionately known as Clementine's Gulch by many. Jebediah remained in jail, a forgotten relic of a darker time. The town thrived, its people united by a shared sense of community and a deep appreciation for kindness and compassion. Clementine and Sheriff Brody lived happily together, their love growing stronger with each passing day. They were a team, partners in every sense of the word. They supported each other, challenged each other, and loved each other unconditionally. Clementine continued to bake her delicious pies and cakes, her bakery becoming a haven for those seeking comfort and connection. She mentored young bakers, passing on her skills and her philosophy of spreading joy through food. Sheriff Brody remained the town's protector, his strength and authority tempered by Clementine's gentle influence. He was a fair and just leader, always willing to listen to the concerns of his community. They often sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and reflecting on their journey. They had faced many challenges, overcome many obstacles, and transformed a town filled with prejudice and resentment into a place of love and acceptance. They had proven that love and kindness can triumph over prejudice, that inner beauty is more valuable than any physical attribute, and that even the most hardened hearts can be softened with compassion. Their love story became a legend in Dust Gulch, a reminder that anything is possible with courage, kindness, and a little bit of apple pie. They had built a life together based on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a shared desire to make the world a better place. And as they looked out over their town, now filled with laughter and joy, they knew that they had succeeded. They had transformed Dust Gulch into a more accepting and compassionate community, a testament to the power of love and the enduring legacy of a kind-hearted baker and a strong, silent sheriff. Their happiness was complete, a beacon of hope shining brightly in the heart of the desert, proving that even in the harshest of environments, love and kindness can always find a way to bloom.